Everyone, and hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and I'm so excited to be here today. Okay, let me just get warmed up here a little bit. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about innovation and growth, and in particular, how efforts to increase diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging drives innovation and growth. And I'm very cognizant that I'm presenting this the day after the new administration here in the United States has rescinded many of the efforts that have been happening to put, for example, DEI efforts in place in government. So I'm very cognizant of this, and it's partly intentional. And it's also partly that I was asked to give a talk and be part of a panel at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, about a week and a half ago. And again, this is one of the largest technology shows on earth. And this company, EMD Electronics, again, they make all sorts of components that go into all of our electronics. They were there with several panels on DEI. And I was intrigued. Why would you talk about DEI at a technology show? And talking to their head of HR and diversity in the United States, he had just come back from Europe, and one of the things that he really emphasized is that this is important to our business. It's important to our innovation and our growth. So, and in particular, we need to have this really strong sense of diversity in order to make things go in our company. Because having a single way of thinking is not going to drive innovation and growth. And more importantly, it is not going to represent the many different perspectives of our customers. So I thought this was really interesting, and I wanted to share that with you here today. I do have some slides here, and let me get them up. So today I'm going to be talking about the impact of DEI and in particular belonging on innovation and growth. So I do want to ask you, first of all, to share some of your favorite ways to increase a sense of belonging and inclusion in your organization. I'm not talking about how do you diversify your numbers. We'll talk a lot about numbers in just a second, but I'm more interested in what are the ways that you as a leader have been fostering the sense of people being able to feel like they're part of the tribe, that they're not an outsider, that they really belong. And as you know, if you've changed jobs or you can think back to a time when you were coming into an organization, it's hard to get your grounding, to figure out where you stand. And the sooner you can do that, the faster you can get integrated, the better off you're going to be to become a high functioning, highly value contributor to the company. And this is the key. How do you actually do this? So, I'm going to be talking today about a couple of different things. And I think one of the ways that I want to talk about is what is it that drives innovation and innovation drives growth. So, the key perspective, and also I'm going to just put up the slides if I can figure out how to get to them. I'll be showing many slides today so you can see them here. All right. So the first thing I want to say is that, let me just hide that one a little bit for a second. That the most important thing to drive innovation is diverse perspectives. That you can get perspectives from all around the company, from your customers, from your partners and suppliers, from your investors, as many different perspectives as possible to help you achieve what you're trying to do. And in particular, innovation is about understanding your customers of today and the customers of your future. Now, one of the things that I have done a lot of research on is how do you drive disruption? And the organizations who can look further out into the future, who can understand who their future customers are, the further they can look out, the more disruptive, the more innovative they can be. And so, this focus on understanding customers is so important. And really, it's hard to do that if everybody's coming from the same background, from the same perspectives. I don't care if it's highly educated, East Coast, international, whatever that one model perspective is, it's not going to be as powerful as a diverse team. And there are some numbers that prove this. And if when people ask for data statistics, there are overwhelming numbers of data statistics that show this. So we see that diverse teams do actually drive growth. So, and the reasons why is there's better decision making. Diverse teams make better decisions 87% of the time than an individual decision maker. Increased innovation and revenue. So diverse management teams, and particularly leaders, are driving 19% higher revenue. And then market expansion, organizations with diverse teams are 70% more likely to capture new markets. And I have some sources there. And again, you can get them at the slides here. And the QR code will also get you to that point. So when you think about the evidence that's out there, there's an overwhelming amount of evidence and data. And so if you're looking for data and evidence, and you can look inside of your own organizations, when you have teams with multiple perspectives, diverse perspectives, it gets better. And I really do love this quote from Jennifer Brown. When people are able to bring their full selves to work and feel welcomed and valued and respected for their differences, again, respect for their differences, they perform at a higher level and contribute more to the organizations than when they are divided by differences. And Jennifer has done a humongous amount of work. I look up to her, I reference her. She's the author of Inclusion, How to Be an Inclusive Leader. And their focus, I think, less so on the numbers of diversity and more about the importance of people feeling safe, of people feeling that they can be their whole selves, can say all these wacky things, whatever it is that they are doing, that they feel included, they feel like they belong, and therefore they can bring all of that richness of their experiences, of their knowledge and wisdom to the innovation table. I think this is the problem in many cases. When we think about DEI efforts, we're looking at numbers. And so many companies have struggled for so long to make this work. And the thing that we haven't focused on is how do we make this act of including people from very different backgrounds the key to success. And the key problem here is I think we focus more on just bringing people in and not figuring out how we can get people to work together. It's a lot easier to get people to work together if we're the same, which is why we oftentimes hire for culture fit. I invite you to think about hiring people for culture add. And that's a completely different exercise. The idea is we have a need for different perspectives, but different perspectives create friction. And friction can be hard to manage. And I do believe that friction is so important. And in particular, that friction is what drives innovation. Again, these different opinions, different ways of thinking about the world. And yet at the same time, it's really difficult to do. How difficult is it to do? Well, let's look at one of the most innovative companies in the world, and that is Amazon. And what Amazon has as its leadership principles is a very important one, which is one of my favorite leadership principles they have is have backbone, disagree, and commit. And this is the CEO, Andy Jassy, in a video talking about it. And I want to read just one part of this. It is that leaders commit to respectfully challenge decisions when they disagree, even when doing so is uncomfortable or exhausting. And they do not compromise for the sake of social cohesion. So this is one of the biggest problems is that when you bring friction in, it doesn't feel good. When you're trying to have disagreements and can you disagree well, it's very difficult to do because it can shatter that sense of belonging and inclusion. And so disagree. How do you disagree well? How do you stand up for a belief that is really important, that your perspective gives you that when everything is at stake? And I can tell you that as a woman of color, and I've been in these rooms at a young age and now at a much older age, and it is difficult to just be in that room. It takes a tremendous amount of energy. And then to, on top of that, raise my hand and have a contrarian view to what the room is saying takes a tremendous amount of effort and confidence. And the thing that gets me through continuously is knowing that the people in the room support me, tell me that I need to be there, that my perspective, even though it's different and challenging, is valued. So I think it's so important for us to consider this, that if we want to be the strongest, most innovative, fast moving, growth minded organizations, we need to have different perspectives and we need to foster a strong sense of inclusion and belonging to create this container, to create the scaffolding for us to be able to disagree and disagree well. Because this is what disagreement looks like. Disagreement in highly innovative, fast moving, disruptive organizations is when everybody comes into the room. They know each other really well. There's a tremendous sense of bond between people and a tremendous agreement on what you're trying to achieve. The way you want to achieve it is highly debated, and people will be, really arguing, putting their points on the table, disagreeing strenuously. And at the end of the meeting, they go out, they go have dinner together, they go play softball together. They can connect in that way because they have those ties of that sense of belonging and inclusion. So that's what it looks like. That's what good disagreement looks like. And I want to just emphasize how important this is, that it really happens in a company's culture, but it also happens when you bring in people with many different diverse opinions. So let me get into some of the data. I'm going to throw a lot of data at you right now. So the first one is looking at the state of diversity. And again, I was at CES, so I wanted to show how the technology industry was faring compared to the rest of the world. And so these are some numbers from the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Committee, I think it is, from the US government. And these are the percentage of each demographic in each of the areas. So I look at first all the workers, a segment of them who are in high tech, and then in particular the tech managers. Again, breaking up by women and various different ethnicities. So we can see here that, for example, women are not representative in the high tech space compared to their population in the industry, almost by half. And yet, when you look at Asians, it's almost 3 times a higher representation. And when you go look in particular at how this has changed over time, the difference is startling. I think one thing in particular to note is that, let me just get to my slides here, that representation from 2014 to 2022 has increased by a good number, not a huge amount, but a good number over 8 years for every single ethnicity. And then when you look at women, it stayed exactly the same. Now, what's interesting is that when you look at tech managers, women, the number of women, the percentage of women has actually fallen over the past 8 years. This is a reversal and a stagnation of what we should be seeing, especially with all of the efforts that have been happening. And you've got to ask yourself, again, there have been so many efforts. I've been in the middle of these efforts to get more women interested in STEM. There are some long-standing historical issues that keep women out of the industries. We get it. But you would have hoped that there would be higher numbers than that, and it hasn't happened. Now, one of the things that I think is important is to look at it, and again, that could be against systemic reasons, et cetera, but I believe it's fundamentally about when you bring people in, are they coming into an environment where you're just dropping them into something and where nothing has changed and that friction is there? And so, how do you take into account the fact that if you're going to bring this culture add, because if you're bringing a woman into an all male team, it's not going to be a fit. So, what are we doing to increase the chances of success? That that person will feel like they belong, that they include. And I think that's the reason why a lot of the efforts that have happened around diversity have not been successful. Is that we do all this effort and we haven't made the side a long way, the way to change our culture to be able to allow more friction, to have differences be accepted. So I want to show you one other set of data. And that comes from the McKinsey and Lean In study. And this is really interesting, I believe, because it shows, I'm trying to see how I can make this a little bit bigger. Here we go. It shows the pipeline. So there's some, again, systemic issues that may be holding people back from coming into an industry. But this is showing the data within your own company, what happens. And so one of the things that I see is that, for example, this is the entry level numbers for white men, white women, men of color, and women of color. And you can see that they're somewhat representative of the general population. And yet, when you get to the C suite, the numbers look completely different. It is definitely dominated by white men. Again, there are historical reasons. There's a lot of, I guess, backlog that you have to work through. But if you see where it actually begins, it begins at that very first rung of this career ladder. It begins at that point where people are promoted from entry level into manager. And if you look at the numbers here, men of color and women of color are promoted at almost equal levels to their population at the entry level. And yet white men are promoted at a much higher level, and then women of color are promoted at a much lower level. And so the reason I show this is that we can talk about all the systemic issues, but once you people are in your organization, our opportunities to promote, to grow, to advance the same. And if you do believe in meritocracy, that there's an equal chance that every single person can be promoted and move forward, then if you look at those numbers, you've got to think there's probably something broken in our meritocracy, and especially for women of color. And my suggestion to you, my strong suggestion to you, is to go look at your numbers, look at the intersectionality of gender and race, and say, is there something happening in our organization that we could do to fix that? Because there, I think, if you can fix that, you can fix a lot of other things and really start addressing some of the key reasons why innovation could be stalled in some ways. All right, I'm going to take a moment and see if there are any questions and comments here. I just have some things. Is yes. WEF has walked completely away from DEI and ESG. Yes, completely. That is the political situation at the moment. And I think, frankly, part of it is because we see the differences, as Jennifer Brown was saying. We emphasize the differences rather than saying how do we include people. It's a very different mindset. All right, so let's see. Lynn also says, be constantly curious, ask. Oh, this is how she encourages inclusion and belonging. Be constantly curious. Ask for each person's thoughts as often as possible. Make time for it. And remember, your own personality type is less than 20% of everyone else's type. That's such a great point that, again, you're not going to be like other people. I remember hiring one person when I was at Altimeter, and he came and he knew me quite well because he was a former client. And he says, one of my strengths is I'm a deliberator. I take my time. I'm going to look at things from every direction. And you, Charlene, are an activator. You like to go, make a decision, and move. If we're going to work together, then we have to understand and respect our differences in the way we approach problems. And it has saved me so many times because I would go up to Ed and I would say, I'm trying to make this decision. I need your perspective. And I respect that you may take a day, but I really value it because you will see things from a different perspective. You take your time, you deliberate, and I could really use that. So, again, understanding people's strengths and their differences, it can really help a team make better decisions. Let's see. I want to see what there is out here. All right, here we go. Michael says, when there is a cultural mantra of collegiality, diversity, and stakeholder centricity, there is a basis for contribution. I like that. The basis for contribution and innovation on behalf of creating value. This is in part why a real world understanding of DEI is so important. Thank you for sharing that, Michael. Thank you so much for sharing, again, your perspective on the importance of this, that it's the basis for contribution. Let's see. Anything else here? I think that is right. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this problem. Jay says, encouraging friction is traction and not always winning. So exactly, because it is always about not just necessarily winning, but how do you actually have this friction that happens, but then you can start having and congealing towards a particular point of view that is going to work much better. All right, let me go back to the slides. I'm watching the time. Great. So, how do you actually nurture this really complex sense of diversity for the purpose of inclusion and for the purpose of innovation? And what I want to show are a couple different perspectives and ways to actually foster that strong sense of belonging and inclusion in order to drive innovation, and also how innovation can drive a sense of inclusion and belonging. So let's get into this a little bit. So first of all, one of the most important things is to foster psychological safety. And this may be a new term for some people. It's something that, again, I'm quite familiar with. I've been in this space talking about it for a long time. But the idea of fostering of psychological safety is that you feel safe. Again, I believe that confidence comes from knowing that no matter what happens, you're going to be okay. That's what safety is. I will, again, I think some of you know, I love to jump off cliffs, but I will only jump off a cliff that thousands of other people have jumped off of. So I know it's safe. I'm not going to go along the road, see a cliff and jump off of it because I have no idea what's down there. So, how do you make it safe for people to literally jump off the cliff at the table of innovation, to take a stand and say, oh, this is going to be hard for me to say, but you all have really supported me. I'm going to say it. So, the first thing is something that Lynn had talked about, ensure everyone is heard. A second thing is make it safe to propose novel ideas so that if you hear somebody on your team saying, I have an idea, there's a way that we could do this in a different way. You can say to them, why don't you propose that at the next meeting? And then the third is to make employees actual decision makers. So push the decisions down to people, create this sense of agency that they can actually make decisions and be okay with that. And it's also good to put the responsibility on their shoulders to some extent, because then they can feel the ownership, the burden of ownership, the burden of decision making versus saying, well, I could make that decision. Well, go make that decision. It's hard. It's really hard to be a decision maker. And then finally, I would say create a culture of feedback. When I ask organizations and leaders, how good are you at giving and receiving feedback? I get oftentimes this blank stare. And I think that is such an important thing that if you can create a culture of giving feedback to each other every single day, that it creates this environment of safety that I can say something, I can raise my voice, I can clear with you in a safe way. So I'll give you an example. When I was running Altimeter, we were, again, very, very smart, highly engaged workforce. And we wanted to maintain what Amazon talked about, social cohesion. Everyone was super nice and cordial to each other. And as a result, when somebody was upset, they would come to me and say, so and so did this, and I'm upset about it. And then the other person would come to me and say, so and so is upset at me. I don't know what to do about it. And my point was, we need to stop this and have conversations directly. So we did training. We brought in a person who was expert on the Center for Creative Leadership on their SBI process, situational behavior and impact. And we learned how to give feedback. We would literally say to somebody, and we made it part of our culture, I have an SBI to give you a piece of feedback. Is this a good time? And they give the feedback. And it might be, that was a really good presentation. When you said this, the impact on the room, you could see the mood change. Or when you said this in the presentation, I could see that the room changed. I want you to be aware of that. So giving feedback is a great stepping stone to being able to provide different perspectives. So the first thing I would say again is to provide, again, and foster psychological safety. The second one is to develop trust. And I do this in the context of generative AI. Some of you have probably seen this. This is about how do you build trust and that sense of safety and things that you are doing, again, with generative AI. You have to have that safety and security. It's like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Think about that in the context again, of the use of technology, but also in how you are building relationships inside the organization. And then also, there are certain beliefs that really drive, again, that sense of inclusion and belonging. This is from my book, The Disruption Mindset. And my research found that disruptive organizations, highly innovative, high growth organizations have three beliefs. There's a sense of openness that, again, people can give feedback, but also data and information and decision making is much more transparent. There's a strong sense of agency that people have the ability to act like owners. And this is very different from being empowered, because when you're empowered, it means that you're actually waiting for somebody to give you power so that you can go and act. And I couldn't figure it out. I kept saying to my team members, we have this value of empowered. It's on our desk, it's on the wall, it's in our emails, it's we talk about this all the time. And yet people keep coming up to me and going, "Can I do this? Can I have permission to do that?" I'm like, "Wait, we have this value of empowered." And I realized I may say that they're empowered, but they didn't believe it. So agency is this belief that you have the power innately just by being you to be at the table, to speak up, and to take action. And then the third is, again, action, that we're comfortable with being not right all the time, because if we are having a bias for action to chase after the future, we're going to go as fast as we can. And sometimes we won't make good decisions, but that's okay. We don't fail. We are continuously learning. So those are a couple of the ways to be thinking about things. And let's see, I think I have just a couple more slides, and then I go check and see what comments there are. So, a couple of ways to think about how psychological safety and inclusion and belonging can happen. First of all, again, you all know I love AI. I've been talking about generative AI now for the past 2 years. The ability to democratize creativity with AI means giving, again, a tremendous amount of capabilities and agency and putting that in the hands of people. So you can create content, you can create music and songs, you can brainstorm with AI in a group. It's also being able to write code. I can't write code, and I can now create applications. It is the most thrilling thing to be able to do. Another way to think about this is to use it to aid with translation, because I think if we can understand each other better, especially on global teams, using the translation tools have been a huge boon to increasing inclusion and belonging. But I also want to talk about subtle translations. And these are the ideas of, I'm working on the technology team. I'm working with some business leaders, and we talk completely different ways. How can I create my presentation in a way that this audience can understand me? These little subtle ways of creating types of translation that understands how somebody with a different background and perspective or role in an organization can understand my perspective is a key tool, I think, for these tools. And so using generative AI to help us stand in the shoes of somebody else from their perspective is extremely helpful. And we've never had that before. The other thing, last thing I believe, is that we can also use these tools to bridge different ways of working. I'm going to hide this so you can see it. For example, somebody may work in a highly visual way. Another person may be an auditory learner. Another person may be highly kinesthetic. I may like things in my to-do list and, like a list, my preference, or you might like a Kanban style because that works better for you. Again, this is a way to increase people with different learning styles, people who are neurodiverse, to be able to work in the most effective way that they can. And let me just, again, I do believe that technology can really help us harness this incredible different perspectives that we have, different ways of working, tap into that experience and knowledge, and really increase and foster that sense of innovation and belonging. Oop, I don't need that. Let me get rid of that. So, a couple of other questions and comments. Let me see here. I love this. Lynn says, rule number one is no wrong ideas. Sometimes an idea that seems odd percolates overnight into a bright aha moment that catapults projects. Let's see. We have a couple questions here. As Ram has, AI agents are already taking over pieces of human work, Any thoughts on how these values will be embedded into the LLMs? Again, one of the things that you may have seen very quickly from that AI trust pyramid is fairness. And there is no universal definition of fairness. And so, are you trying to shoot for equity or are you trying to be equitable? Those are two different things. So, every single bit of bias, every single bit of data, every platform comes with its bias. And it's understanding what that bias is and then saying, is that what we want? What kind of fairness do we actually want in this space? Because everybody expects us to be fair. So, what does that look like? So, I think AI agents need to be told what is fair. How are you going to make decisions that are fair? So, while it's taking over a lot of the work that we do, I still think that there's a strong role for us as humans to play in this. Let's see. Lynn says, I love the use of AI to tailor messages to different types of people, and you can learn from that for your own verbal conversations too. Absolutely. I am constantly throwing my conversations that I record into AI and saying, give me tips on ways I could have improved this given the audience. And it's super helpful to learn in that way, but you have to be open to it. Let's see. Bob has a question. Curious to get your take on why all the research for decades of cognitive diversity driving better decision making isn't a key part of the messaging in the current diversity context. DEI branding issue has now reached a fever pitch. I think again, it was so interesting that, again, people in the space have talked about it for a long time, but we tend to want to simplify things, I think, into the numbers. And it is not about the numbers. It is about the numbers and it's also about changing the way we work. And fundamentally, a lot of people in power don't want to change the way they work because it's a different way. It's challenging the norms of how we actually lead. And again, there's this been sea change now for decades, slowly but surely, about changing the way we work. And I do believe that this is partly a backlash to that change. And I think again, this is not a time where we can let go. We have to stepping back. If anything, it's doubling down on our need for inclusion and belonging. That this is a time for us to really look and have an honest conversations with ourselves to say what didn't work in the past. Because we believe we see all the numbers, all the evidence points to diverse perspectives driving innovation and growth. So what went wrong? We can see that the way we did things didn't work. And so I do believe that this focus, not so much on the numbers and much more about making our workplaces, our organizations, even our families, much more inclusive and stronger by doing these very human leadership driven things. These are all things coming from the history, thousands of years of what good leadership looks like. And if we can lean into that, then I think we will drive so many things, so much goodness in our organizations. So that's what I have for today. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. I don't think I have anything at this point. All right, good. I did not put up here what I'm doing for next week, but I will be back next week on Tuesday. I can't remember for the life. I was not as prepared today as I'd like to be because I wanted to add a few things at the last minute. But I will be back next week. I can't remember what I was going to talk about, but you'll see it in my promotions. Again, thank you so much for joining today. As you can see, I'm very passionate about this topic of increasing our sense of belonging and inclusion in order to drive innovation. And I think in the end, by having this strong sense of belonging, we all benefit from that. And it's not just the benefit of our organizations, but we benefit as leaders, as members of teams, where we can bring our full selves and feel safe. That's nothing else. That's again, I think, so important for us to bring into the workplace and to develop as leaders. Again, thank you so much, and I will see you next week. Take care.